It's time for the show about the people and the places of the Carolinas, with the occasional visitors. In addition to hosting the award-winning syndicated TV show Life in the Carolinas, Carl White writes a weekly syndicated column and now hosts this weekly show, the Life in the Carolinas podcast. Now you can hear the story about the stories. And now, here's your host, Carl White.
Good morning, Jeffrey.
Morning.
How you doing?
I'm well. How are you, Carl?
I'm doing great. I think the last time we sat together, we talked about education and arts and why all of that was such an important thing. Because you're a teacher above all things, aren't you?
Yes, that's my primary profession. That's how I pay the bills.
Yeah, so that's a good thing. But we know that you've also served your community from a political standpoint.
Yes.
In Raleigh.
Yes.
And I'd like to talk about that today from the standpoint of where you and I saw each other last, which was at the North Wilkesboro Speedway.
Yes.
And its revival, as it's properly branded now.
Very exciting.
And coming back. So let's kind of delve into that process, and let's talk about the first time that you got wind of something potentially really happening in a positive way to help move things forward.
Sure. Before I start out, Terry Parsons is the key to the whole thing. I joked around with my role in it. I said I took the football and carried it my 10 yards.
Right.
Because my analogy with the football team, with what's happened at the North Wilkesboro Speedway, it has been like a team effort, and everybody's had their own role, their own purpose, their own space that they've had to work in to be able to move the ball down the field. And I had the opportunity to take that football and carry it my 10 yards to get that next first down, and our coach and the whole process has been Terry Parsons. Terry Parsons has been remarkable on how she understood how to work the flow with the community, how to work the flow through the politics behind it, the appropriations behind it, work the flow with the actual owners of the track. Terry's a remarkable person, so she's like the head coach of the football team, so it's exciting.
Well, Terry's someone with a great deal of history, and you say she knows how to do these things. There's good reason, right?
Yes, very much so.
Because of her background.
Yes.
And when you say work the flow, so that we're clear, it's almost, for some people, they might like work. What do you mean she's working? It's not like she's working people, but truly that flow of information and letting everybody have a reason to buy in. Is that the idea?
That is correct. And what is the promotion behind it? How do you generate interest? How do you get the public to generate interest? How do you get people to buy in? How do you connect the right people with each other to be able to accomplish the goal? And she was the key to the whole thing.
That's fantastic. Well, let's talk about when it got into your field officially from Raleigh's standpoint, right? So as a representative, you cover 2 counties, right?
Yes.
Wilkes and Alexander?
That's right, yes.
Okay, so that's your territory.
Yes.
And you've been doing that for how long now?
I'm in my 10th year.
Okay, so 10 years. So
10 years.
So you're not a freshman anymore.
No.
You've done this.
Yeah.
And let's talk about that process now, because, you know, with funds being allocated for this particular project, it seems like there's been quite a bit of confusion about, well, why wasn't that money used for other things? And you're on the appropriations committee, the chair now.
Sure.
So let's talk about how that all works.
Yeah. Well, to give you the big context, we call it ARPA funds, American Rescue Act monies that came down to the state. And the purpose of these monies, there were parameters put to the money that we had to work in. We could not offset our base budget with the monies. We had to use those monies for various purposes that the federal government felt appropriate, with a primary focus on economic recovery due to COVID. So to give you the context on that, it was not like we just received this money and we could say, hey, we're going to cut the state budget by $4 billion and just backfill it.
So it was extra money that had to be spent for a certain purpose.
That is correct, and with the focus of how do you put it in places for recovery because of effects of COVID. Okay. So just to give you that kind of context, and as a full appropriations chair, the first step that happens is we get the governor's proposed budget. And the running joke in the General Assembly is that's our doorstop. We get the budget and we just set the governor's budget down and prop a door open with it.
Right.
Kind of like at the federal level. It's the same kind of concept. But there was an interesting piece in the budget that he had in there that dealt with 3 tracks. And he called it Motorsports Recovery or something of that nature. And it was focused on Rockingham, Charlotte, and North Wilkesboro. And it was an interesting piece of the budget. And my ears really perked up when I heard the explanation of that. And Governor Cooper in his office, there's his head budget writer is named Charlie Peruzzi, and he's very passionate about racing. Mm-hmm. And for years they have been working in Rockingham to try to revive Rockingham, and they have a new owner, and they've tried some things kind of like we have in North Wilkesboro, and I knew that was a passion of the governor. So that came down with some numbers, and I believe it was $10 million each place, and then the local communities had to do a match, primarily focusing on infrastructure. Big concern at Rockingham, there's not water or sewer out to the track because it's not a dramatic distance from the core city, but it's enough to where those...
The water wasn't there.
The water was not there. Plus, too, the Charlotte track has... the core track in Charlotte is the oldest piece of that facility, and much of that dates back to the mid-'60s. So I got that point, and then the North Wilkesboro piece. So it was interesting. So it perked my interest, and then I started getting phone calls and talked with Terry about it, and talked with Speedway Motorsports about what their plans were, what they wanted to do, what do we need to actually accomplish the goal of reviving North Wilkesboro. That was my primary concern. It's my district.
Right.
So I'm down there fighting for the district. What can we do to make...
Was there a corresponding person in Rockingham that was as impassioned as you are?
Well, yes.
Okay.
Ben Moss, Representative Ben Moss, from Rockingham, very excited. He's a big race fan. He initially saw that and said, Elmore, what's going on? And I was like, it looks like we're going to try to get some money for your area. You in? And he's like, yeah. I want to see some money for my racetrack. And I talked with Representative Baker, who represents Cabarrus, and said, are you in? Do you want to help the Charlotte track, and do you want to do something for motorsports across the state? Yes, I'm in, no question.
Okay.
So I got the buy-in from my folks that I have immediate contact with in my chamber in the House.
Right. So that was important, right?
Huge. You want to make sure that the delegation from wherever this is affecting is in, because the worst thing that could happen is, let's say Representative Moss said, I have no interest in dealing with that.
Right.
That would create problems. So that was step one. And so I had to think about what is the strategy, what do these tracks really need, and then how do we use the money to actually meet those goals, and is it enough money to meet those goals? So my next step, talked with Terry a little bit about her vision. What she wanted to see, talked with SMI about their vision. Then I talked with the Motorsports Association, and they're represented by a former member named Karen Ray. And she talked to me about all of these racetracks that are all over the state that because of COVID, they actually had to shut their doors. Right. There was no opportunity whatsoever to hold races. You could not have anybody in person at these tracks. Well, at a track like Charlotte, they ran iRacing. They ran races without people in the stands. Well, if you are Ace Motor Speedway, you couldn't have people, period.
They wouldn't have the infrastructure.
And the COVID regulations would not allow that size group. We saw this same problem with our theaters across the state, our playhouses, or baseball stadiums, major revenue source for them. Many of these small racetracks were going to go out of business if they did not have some money, some relief money, to help offset their losses. So the next approach was, how do we help the smallest track, from the little dirt track all the way up to the big whopper that is Charlotte Motor Speedway, that is kind of the racing crown jewel in North Carolina.
So you were looking at not just the big three, if you will.
That's right.
But you're like, well, wait a minute, we have a bigger problem.
Yes.
So let's take a look at that as well.
Yes.
Okay.
And how do we work through that? Because a lot of people think this is very organized, like there's just steps to racing, and it's really not. It's I compare it to baseball. Like there's the 1A teams, the 2A teams, the 3A teams, then you've got your major leagues.
Right.
And you think it's very linear, but it doesn't flow that way. We've got some folks that just race small tracks,
Right.
and they're small community tracks, to kind of mid-sized tracks like our Hickory Motor Speedway, Bowman Gray, to the NASCAR facility in Charlotte, and it's very fluid. So how do we take this industry, which motorsports is our, stock car racing is our state sport.
Right.
I mean, this is North Carolina at its best. Even when there was an announcement about us being the #1 state for business, one of the hints that CNBC gave out was there's only left turns in this state.
Right.
So it's in our roots.
Right.
How do we help the industry as a whole in our state, and then make this a model for the use of the COVID funds that actually, after we got done with it, other states are like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do to encourage motorsports in Kentucky, in Texas, and all of these places where there's a presence because of the economic impact.
So did it inspire action in those other communities?
Oh, yes, very much so.
Okay.
And we're dealing with that now. And I find that interesting. We're dealing with a little issue with Texas, and Texas has seen the benefit of racing and big events economically, and they actually put money behind it to try to encourage large events in their state because of the economic revenue that comes off of it.
Were there oppositions to this idea?
No, I don't want to say there was opposition. Everybody likes racing.
Right.
So it wasn't, the issue wasn't, I think there was more questions than anything else, like, is this really a problem? And yeah, it was. When you have small tracks that were saying, I'm just going to have to shut the facility down, I can't, we can't take this kind of loss. Yeah, it had a direct economic impact, and it also tied in with those other entities that were coming in saying, hey, we lost ticket sales at what would be a good example, the Tanger Center in Greensboro was someone that we were talking to. Our ticket sales were annihilated. We can't get shows. Our local theaters. So how do we leverage these funds to actually deal with economic recovery, specifically with this sport? And we did touch the others in a different way too.
Right. Well, let's talk about that. So it was $10 million that was initially talked
Yes.
about. That number increased a bit, right?
Oh, it increased a bit. We were the first to present our budget, the House side. So I was in discussions with SMI. I said, what's your dream number? What do you need if you want the Cadillac version of the North Wilkesboro Speedway? What do you need at Charlotte, and what do you need at Rockingham to give you the total vision that you need? We couldn't hit that number. I mean, that's an exorbitant number. But our proposal from the House, we did $20 million to North Wilkesboro, we did $20 million to Charlotte, and we did $10 million to Rockingham. Then we created a fund that was a grant fund for the small tracks with some parameters, because we wanted to make sure someone didn't just have a cow pasture that they run go-karts on that wanted to apply for funds. So we put some parameters and created a grant fund for our mid-size and small tracks to apply to be able to receive some recovery money, and they had to show receipt loss. This is what our revenues were in ticket sales for these years up to COVID, then to actually show their loss, and they could apply for that. And I believe we put $5 million in that fund in the beginning, and that was with coordination with the Motorsports Association to make sure those parameters were right, that we were actually getting the money to folks that needed it, and also folks that had a legit business.
Jeffrey, what do you say to people who are like, well, wait a minute, you're taking millions of dollars and putting that money with people that already have a lot of money, right? I mean,
Sure.
I know that's an argument
Sure.
that you've heard.
Sure.
How'd you deal with that?
Well, I think it's like any other economic incentive. You have to have money to be able to generate money, and the economic impact of these facilities. The Charlotte Motor Speedway, what was the number? I believe it's $80 million economic impact each race date. That economic generation of sales, of food sales, hotel sales.
The
for
impact
that
on the
region.
area.
On the area.
So we're not talking about $80 million going into Marcus's pocket. We're talking
No,
about the benefit for the community.
That is going to your grocery store, that is
Right.
going to your corner market, that's going to your gas station, that's going to your local restaurant, that's going to your hotel. All of those pieces, people are benefiting from the event. Some of the estimates that we've got for the North Wilkesboro Speedway is about a $20 million impact for each major event. So it can have a $40 million impact regionally. So this would, and we consider the northwest corner the impact area from Yadkinville to Boone, with those people spending their money at these large events.
Wait a minute. Per event?
Per large event.
Large event.
Because we were using data from when we had NASCAR races.
Okay.
And that was in 96, and they had a
Right.
pretty firm number on that. That was 12.5 million. That was an economic impact of each race date.
Right. I see. So even with the number of people not being as many in the beginning,
Yes.
those numbers are still significant.
Beyond. Even the events, I believe, that have been held where they've been sold out at these first races that are floating around 10,000 people. You think about what monies have been spent by those 10,000 people to be able to attend that event, not only at the track, but all of the other places that they've touched in their journey to be able to participate in that event. So we are already seeing an economic impact here. Another thing that I read is that tourism money that is being spent in our area has gone up in the county this past year by 30-some%.
Right.
The racetrack will continue to play a role in that.
What does that forecast look like? I understand now is a moment of rebuilding,
Sure.
refreshing, the revival, pulling up the asphalt, raining dirt, then putting a new track down. So all those things are actually going to happen now, right?
Yes.
So they're not dependent upon, the state continually giving, big bundles of money. The commitment is made now from the ownership side, right?
Yes, and the state's approach was never, we're going to do it all. That's not
Right.
the role of the government. This was just enough money to be able to make it financially viable for the business to be able to continue their investment into what they have.
If I understand correct, a great deal of that money, it wasn't money that was going straight to the ownership group. This was money for infrastructure, right?
That is correct. One of the disadvantages we have with the track is we do not have proper sewer going to the track. We need improvements to water going to the track. There is water to the track, but it is not the amount of water that would be needed to make it functional. So that's a big chunk of it. Then the other pieces of it, it's going to things like lights, fencing, actual physical improvements to the property of the track, which once those improvements are made, you have to think of it in a circle. It makes the property value more,
Right.
which in turn creates more tax revenue for the local tax base. So money flows in a circle.
And the infrastructure, as far as water and sewer going to the track, does that only serve the track, or does that benefit the community more as well?
I think it will benefit the community down the road. The main focus is to get it to this business,
Right.
that we now have a corporate presence. That's the main objective. But once lines are in place, the ability to take lines where you need them to go in the future will be there because the piece of infrastructure is in the ground. So, yes, long term, I think it's very beneficial for those lines to be in the ground for future growth.
So, future growth, communities that are there now that may not be tapped on
That's
to
correct.
sewer or water, they'll have that capacity now.
Yes, if needed.
Sure.
If needed. And what we've found in our community, we have aging housing, and with the aging housing, you have aging septics.
Sure.
And a lot of people get in a situation where their septics have failed, and they need that ability. So, yeah, it's long-term infrastructure for long-term growth.
You know, there's a part of this whole thing that is confusing for a lot of people.
Sure.
Right? Because it's the money. Back to the money again.
Everything revolves around money, Carl.
So you have the appropriations, this money comes in.
Yes.
So when we look at the cost, and I think it's important we look at it and then talk about how much that's actually costing, say, your district, which is Wilkes and
Yes.
Alexander. So of the monies that were appropriated and the monies funneled to the area,
Yes.
how much is the water and sewer actually costing, the people in Wilkes or Alexander counties?
Zero.
Wait a minute. So there's conversation going on, because I've had people call me and says, "Can you believe how much this is costing the area for them to do this?" I said, "Well, I don't think it's costing anything because the money's been appropriated." "Oh, but it is." And so you're saying that it's zero cost.
Zero cost from a local level.
Right.
And that was a critical part when I moved the appropriation through. The
Right.
governor's original proposal wanted matching dollars.
Right.
Well, if you look at Rockingham and you look at North Wilkesboro and the surrounding areas of those, there's no money locally to be able to match. And I knew that it would kill the project. If the locals had to make the decision to put forth $1.5 million or something in infrastructure, I just didn't have the confidence that they would do it. So with the appropriation, we eliminated any matching requirements that were part of the original proposal.
So it was originally proposed. So that's where
by Governor Cooper.
Okay, so that's where the idea
Yeah.
may have come from,
Yes.
right? So people would have heard that.
Yes.
But once it got through the process,
Yes.
which wasn't a quick process, but
No.
so how long did that process take?
Months. Because the Senate came back with their proposal, which eliminated the whole project.
Oh, okay.
So then we inserted it back in the House.
No raise for you.
And that's right. And negotiated the money back.
Right.
My original proposal was $20 million. It got shaved back to 18.
Right.
But we eliminated any sort of local match to where the 18 million is strictly for the project and the infrastructure going into it. So all the locals are doing is they're taking 18 million of recovery money that's sitting in a coffer at the county office building
Specifically for
this.
So once again, it was not pulling from other monies that would have come.
No.
Right?
No.
So this is extra money
Sitting there
specifically for a certain purpose.
That is correct. And they have no local monies that have to go towards it at all. So
All
this
right.
is not going to affect the property tax monies that go into the county commission at all. They have no match to these dollars whatsoever. They are the proper term is the fiduciary
Right.
of the money to make sure that the money is going to the proper place.
So, and it's not money that was sent with just no strings attached. There were very specific strings
Yes,
for its purpose.
that is correct.
Is that unlike other special appropriations? Isn't that the way they all kind of work?
Kind of, yes. You don't want to get too specific because you can limit in case
Right.
if there's a problem, but you definitely do not want to be too broad when you
Right.
send down an appropriation because then, yes, you could see monies being moved. The worst thing that happens with local appropriation is that they don't use the money, and then it creates a system where they have to send it back, which is not good. You never want that. So you have to have a specific purpose. But yes, this is specifically for infrastructure to the track and also infrastructure dealing with the track itself.
So that's good news.
Oh, it's beyond good news, which ultimately for, like I said before, the benefit to our community, you are improving that facility where that facility becomes of more value, thus becomes more taxable.
Sure.
in the long run. So, yes, the locals are benefiting greatly from this, not only in the immediate, but in the long term.
So when you looked at the area that was going to be impacted in a positive way.
Yes.
So you've got Wilkes and Alexander as far as your territory, if you will. So how far out does this benefit go? How many miles out? Wilkes County being the largest county in the state of North Carolina, and Alexander's not a tiny county either. So how far out are people, businesses, restaurants, hotels? How far does that benefit grow?
We are working on a proper analysis right now, but we basically consider the northwest corner. So you take Wilkes County and the 8 counties that connect to it that would benefit from this because of the vicinity of the counties. And I'll just give you an example on how some of the community leaders are seeing it. Mount Airy is pursuing doing a conference center, a small conference center to be able to accommodate conferences that float around 300 people. This has been a project that they have wanted to do, they've been saving money to do, but they wanted to time it correctly. When the racetrack firmed up on coming back, the revival, they pulled the trigger. They said, yes, we're doing our conference center, because the vision is that they can market their conference center to race dates, activities at the track, and that is in Mount Airy in Surrey. So they see the economic benefit all the way out to that, because, when a big event takes place because of hotels, various things, someone will stay in Mount Airy at one of their facilities and drive to the race itself. So it's a benefit of our whole region.
Well, really, when you look at, if you compare, say, Wilkes County's track compared to Charlotte, people will easily drive 45 minutes to an hour if you live on the south side of Charlotte.
That's correct.
To get to the race, or you live in Rock Hill. So driving a distance, that's not a concept unfamiliar with race fans.
That's correct. And a lot of our race fans benefit from camping facilities too, which we are blessed to have quite a bit of that. So I see that down the road with the track, you will see the RVs pulling into Kerscott Dam, into Stone Mountain, to be able to then go from the camping facility to the track itself, which I think long term the track is even going to incorporate some camping facilities there too, which is just part of the racing culture and the business model.
Let's talk about now that this is happening, and as you continue to make your trips back to Raleigh, and from the appropriation side and other folks that you sit with in service, let's talk about the future and how you visualize not only our tracks being supported and bringing people together, but let's talk about that heritage part. We're not talking about a track that has no historic significance. This is really big.
Yes.
So how do you imagine the state's going to be celebrating in the future this thing that was and now is again?
Well, that was part of the vision. We did put in the appropriation $1 million for what's called the Moonshine Trail, and this is mimicked by what they do in Kentucky. They have a bourbon whiskey trail where if you are interested in Kentucky whiskey, that you can follow various areas where the major distillers are. We have this same vision for our distillers here in North Carolina with the role of moonshine. And so we want to build up the tourism component with that, which North Wilkesboro is huge in that, and the history of it. This area is the birthplace of NASCAR. Not just the first races, but the actual activities that led to the formation of stock car racing. And I think that has been recognized at the state level and with what we're doing. So
do you imagine that celebration will continue to grow?
Yes, I do. There's a fascination with this. it's almost seemed like folk heroes at this point. You know, it's almost like a Robin Hood kind of thing, and people are fascinated by that story, and they want to see where this took place. What is this about? You know, these guys that were running cars on these dirt roads back in the hills. What is that, and how does that work? And they were making homemade moonshine. What does that taste like? What does that look like? You know, what is it? I think it's very marketable right now. People are fascinated by it.
So when you're talking with your cohorts in Raleigh about this idea, it's on not on the official side, but when you get those nods to let me ask you something. Is there that great curiosity still there?
Beyond.
Really?
Beyond. Yes. And there was a speech I was giving about agriculture on the floor, and one of my colleagues stood up and said, yes, the man from Wilkes County where they grow their corn in a jar. People are very fascinated by it. And as I worked the political people buying in. Right. Yeah, I passed out a lot of jars of legal moonshine that I purchased at the ABC store from our local distillers.
How quickly you clarified that.
Yes. And a lot of hats. A lot of hats of We Want You Back,
right.
North Wilkesboro Speedway hats. So it was a very powerful thing.
Yeah. We Want You Back. Such a simple idea.
Yes.
For a concept, for a campaign. Where did that come from?
Terry Parsons.
Okay.
That's her marketing genius.
Right.
She realized that you had to have public buy-in with it to help it move through the political process, which really helped me. One of the best things that happened in Raleigh, we, through the Motorsports Association, we worked out Marcus Smith and Dale Earnhardt Jr. visiting to talk about the benefit of motorsports and how this money would help. And
so how'd that go?
It went wonderful.
Yeah, talk about it, though. I mean, share with me what happened. Obviously, I saw some materials, so I get an idea of what was said and how that came down. But the conversation that you had before and then after, how did it change the mood, if you will?
Oh, it was wonderful. We first, you want them to meet with leadership. So on my side, we met in the Speaker of the House's office, Tim Moore. And Marcus came down, and Dale Jr. was with him, and I had my We Want You Back hats, and I had my moonshine from our local distillers, in a bag, ready to go, just for the right moment to really get the buy-in. And they, of course, their focus was on Charlotte because that's the biggest facility from Marcus's perspective, and he was talking about that. And then Dale Jr. started talking about his series with the lost racetracks, and he started talking repeatedly about North Wilkesboro. North Wilkesboro is a prime example of this. This is a benefit that we could have, the historical component of it. I was there as a child, remember playing at it, and all the members were just, that were at that meeting were just, he's a good storyteller.
Right.
A good ambassador. And I said, I appreciate you guys being here. I've got stuff for you because the benefit of what NASCAR has done and what stock car racing can do for us in the future. Here's a hat because we want you back at North Wilkesboro. We appreciate what you're thinking about doing, what you're working towards, and I've got some really good apple brandy here for you, Marcus, and I've got some just straight moonshine for you, Dale, that you could put as fuel in your car. And they laughed, and they really appreciate it. And my wife was fortunate to attend the event. She was in Raleigh with me that week, and we had the hats, and we said, can I get a picture with you guys?
Right.
And we took the hats, and Dale Jr. put his on real quick.
Right.
And then Laura handed Marcus the hat and said, we really need this for the picture. And I think it was at that moment, I truly believe that the buy-in from Marcus was 100%, because he took the hat and he looked at it for a minute, and then he put it on his head. And then we started shooting pictures.
Right.
And we put that on our social media. And I'm not a big social media there's not a lot of people that follow me, okay? I mean, I've got a decent following, but I'm not like it's massive following. All of a sudden, it started going through these NASCAR followers, these little blogs, everything. Right. Marcus Smith, Dale Jr. at the General Assembly, and they had the hats on. Then the speaker sealed the deal even more. You know, he took let Dale Jr. Speak at the well of the House, which is a huge honor. Very few people speak at the actual well, and took him down to show him the speaker loves cars, and showed him his car. Actually gave him one of his old license plates, because the Speaker of the House license plate is a 3, because he's third in line from the governor. So we really played that up, and Dale Jr. did an excellent job, and Marcus too, of being ambassadors of the sport as a whole, and really advocating for what we were trying to do for the COVID money. But when he put on that hat, I could tell he's committed to do what he can in North Wilkesboro.
So it was that symbolic moment that meant a lot to you.
Meant a lot to me. I thought that the buy-in's there, so we can move forward. This is not going to be just wasted money.
Right. I think that's the exciting bit of news, is that, or information. I don't know if it's actually news, but I do think it's important information to know that, you know, the moments along the way of where people buy in, because even for an ownership group, you know, they're pitched all sorts of things.
Sure.
But to make this commitment, when Greg Hoppman sat where you're sitting a few weeks ago, we talked about that, and we talked about the fact that there were some people that were cautiously optimistic, and he said he completely understood why. But he said all the stars lined up.
Yes.
And he used this expression, he said, all the right people were pulling on the rope at the same time.
Yes.
So everyone moving in that same trajectory. That's what made it happen.
Sure. And it's a business. I mean, I feel sure there was analytics done on if we put this money in, what is our return in investment as a business, or is this creating just a financial hole for us? Right. And I think at that time, when the little story I just told was taking place, those kind of analysis were being done. And him as the head of his organization, which is a multi-state organization, I mean, this is a big business. Right. We're making those decisions. And it was really neat when he put on the hat, and I realized Marcus is in. Yeah. Marcus is in.
Where do you imagine the future now, from the perspective of from not only state but on a local level? What do you think the long-term benefits are going to be?
Oh, and I think there will be huge from their business model. That they've told me through the whole process that with any of their facilities, they've moved away from just a event twice a year facility to multi-use facilities that are open year-round with various aspects. So I envision for our area not only the historical component, they really want to play that up almost like a museum type thing where people, which there was traffic to the track even in disrepair of people that just wanted to see it.
Curiosity.
Every weekend folks would just drive to it just to look at it. So to play on that component of almost like people going to Mecca, you know, diehard old race fans. So they will play on that component to things like car shows, light shows, concerts, all sorts of multi-use with the facility. And that will be a benefit for our community because we do not have that type of facility where it is a basic stadium of that magnitude that we will have in our community. So I think you will see that. So there will be events that are constant. It's not just one-shot deals with it. That will reap benefits. And with that will reap the development of a tourism economy, which I feel like we do have a tourism economy, and that is an area that we could achieve a lot of growth in our community. I don't want to say it's been underutilized, but I think to a certain extent it has. So.
Well, I think it makes sense when you look at the tourism that absolutely is in place now.
Yes.
That's real heavy during the fall. It's Merle Fest. There are certain things that are natural things to happen because they've been happening. So there's an audience already there. So it sounds like this is going to add multiple other opportunities for that same type of big number of people to come to the area. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, very much so. And I think that it will help leverage other tourism destinations that are in our area. Like Boone automatically gets a lot of traffic because they have the anchor of the university and Blowing Rock and some very traditional tourism type areas and the natural resources, that this will allow us to become more regional with our approach with tourism and utilize our natural resources too. And this is kind of like a what do you want to call it, a stimulus to that. It connects the dots for that.
I think sometimes we underestimate what it takes to pull that many people together.
Oh, yes.
I mean, that's a significant endeavor. And if there are races, for example, or concerts that have a natural audience anyway, so of course they have to be informed. You have to let them know something's happening, but they're going to come just because it's happening.
That's right.
So the cost of bringing that customer back to an area is much less than recruiting someone, reaching someone that's never been here before, and they're only coming for one purpose. Here, these people are going to keep coming back over and over and over again.
That is correct, and I found that interesting. The contact with SMI for me working through this process, his name is Greg Walter, and he's vice president and also the manager there of Charlotte. Something they look at their data is repeat customers. That what do we do, because we know if we can get them in the door and enjoy the experience, we can keep them. And are we doing the right things to where they are a consistent customer? It's almost like the cruise ship model. I've heard that cruise ships, once you go cruising, that the repeat buy is very, very high.
If you like it, you keep liking it.
You keep liking it, and it's the same model here. So I think, Carl, that's a good analysis of it. That you have folks that come into our area already. If they're hooked by this, they will come for the next 20 years to various things. Just
for that. They may not come to Merle Fest. They may not come to Carolina in the fall. They may not do these things, but they will do this thing in a repetitive manner.
Correct. Yeah. And that diversifies our consumer for our area.
So the consumer for the area, let's just take a moment and break that down into what we're actually talking about. So hotels make a lot of sense to me, right? People have to stay somewhere. But restaurants and other shopping, talk about that.
Well, I think this will even filter to our downtown developments that have been worked on in North Wilkesboro and Wilkesboro. This ties to small retail. This ties to all aspects of the service industry. I think that it will even help our box stores, and our grocery stores. So I think it really touches all of the retail component that we have available in our community, and also will encourage growth in those sectors too.
Well, sounds pretty darn exciting.
It's beyond exciting. It's huge for our area. I mean, economically, we're a Tier 1 county in the state, meaning that we're supposedly one of the most economic depressed areas in the state, and this is a wonderful shot in the arm. I was at the post office. This really struck me this week, and it was a lady I did not know, and she saw my tag, and she said, "You're somehow involved in the government." And I said, "Yes, I'm the state representative." And she said, "Things are really bad." She said, "Food costs are up. Gas is so expensive. The inflation's awful. But you know what? I feel good because we've got the racetrack. That's exciting."
Right.
It really is a symbol for our community.
Right.
And that makes me feel good as a representative to see what is happening and the economic benefits that will come from this that are not just immediate. These are economic benefits that will play out for the next 10, 20 years.
Right. And maybe even longer.
Even longer.
Yeah, that's exciting. Having the aspect of history and the preservation of that puts North Carolina, specifically Wilkes, in a very interesting position that no one else in the nation competes with.
No, and because of the actions of folks that generations back in our area, it's a wonderful blend of past moving into the future. You don't see that a lot.
Yeah. So it's a good thing.
It's a great thing.
Right. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Carl.
Thanks for listening to the Life in the Carolinas podcast. If you enjoyed your time with us, please visit the show's website at lifeinthecarolinas.com. Join our mailing list, and we'll keep you updated every week on what we have coming up and other interesting things around the Carolinas. We value you as a podcast subscriber. We'll see you next week. And remember what Carl says, it's never a bad time for a good story.